Immortals of Aveum is a brand new AAA game from EA, and the requirements to run it are actually crazy. Pulling across the official EA blog post about this game running on Unreal Engine 5, they suggest Windows 10 or later, a Core i7-9700 Ryzen 3700X, 16 gigs of RAM, as well as a 2080 Super at minimum. This is crazy. For recommended quality running at medium in-game, they suggest a 3080 Ti. That is absolutely bonkers, and in this video, we'll hopefully figure out what exactly we can change in the game itself to make it more playable if you're running anything around a 2080 Super or less. And of course, if you're running the recommended like I am actually, we'll see just how bad it actually is. That is at 2K 60, at 1080p 60 they suggest the 2080 Super. Regardless, that's absolutely insane and out of reach for most players, so that's what we'll be going through in this video here. We'll be finding the optimized settings as well as what settings make the largest impact while in game, and I'll be running through those in this optimization guide. So without further ado, in the description down below you'll find Windows 10, 11 and Nvidia optimization guides, as we won't be running through those at all in this video. I've also got a stutter fix included later on in this video, as this is an Unreal Engine game, so we'll see just how that goes. For now, we'll head across to Steam or wherever you have this game installed, and we'll start by running it. So up here you can see what gear I'm running. Even though it is really high end, this video is going to apply for pretty much everyone playing the game. The differences should be the same for pretty much everyone, or at least very similar. Turning down certain settings will have a bigger impact than other settings on pretty much all hardware. If you see this error here, all you need to do is make sure your video card has the minimum required memory, which mine does, and try lowering the resolution and or closing other applications that are running. Alright, so closing a whole bunch of Chrome tabs and stuff, we should now hopefully have enough VRAM available. Let's try that again. Now, if you're like me and you struggle to actually reach the main menu of this game, reaching an out of memory issue, what we can do is customize the options file, which we were going to get to later, but we'll get to it now. Essentially, the game is trying to launch up with options that are way too good for our PC, even with a 3080 Ti, so manually changing it fixes it. This may not be an issue for you, but it definitely was for me. What we'll do is we'll hold start and press R to bring up the run dialog. Inside of here, we'll type in %local app data %, and hit enter. Then inside of it here, we'll sort by date, and you should see a P3 folder. I named it P4 just to see if it would recreate, and it is. The game's config is located in this P3 folder, so we'll open it, open saved, followed by config and Windows. You may see a few different options there. Essentially, just find the one that isn't crash report, and inside of it, you'll find all of these configuration files for the actual Unreal 5 engine. What we'll do is we'll scroll down and look for the game user settings.ini, and we'll open this with a text editor like Notepad. Now inside of it, you'll see a ton of options. Lots of these will be set to 3, 4, 2, whatever. Essentially, I just took all of these options and set them all equal to 1, lowering the in-game options to the lowest possible setting, and on top of this, I changed the resolution quality from 100 to 50. You probably don't need to do all of this work here, but lowering these settings before we actually launch up the game itself should cause it to not run out of video memory. This is probably a bug that they'll fix sometime in the future, so you can adjust this before firing up your game to lower all of the settings preemptively just in case things don't work for you and it complains about running out of VRAM. On top of this, I also changed the resolution from 2K to just 1080, even though my monitor is set to 2K still. Anyways, with lowering all of these settings in our option file, we were eventually able to get to the main menu and at least not crash. Now, clicking through the initial setup will eventually be dropped to the main menu here. You can see I'm sitting at a solid 60. If I go into settings, followed by display at the very top, everything is really big. We have normal options here as well as DLSS, as well as on the graphics tab, everything here should be set to low, or at least low for the most part. This game is very loud. Let's fix that. Okay, so most of the options here are set to low in order for us to actually start up the program, and that's what I did inside of the options file. So if you manage to launch this up perfectly on the first try, then your options menu is likely not going to look like this. Let's hide the overlay and get to the options. So in order to optimize this game, assuming you were able to launch it, head across to settings, and under the display tab, we'll start here. So these top two options are your preference, then display mode. Set this to full screen for the best performance and change the resolution to match your monitor. In my case, 2K. VSync should be turned off unless you're getting screen tearing, which may be something you get in this game. If your FPS is low enough during gameplay, you may need to turn this on, but for now, leave it off. Then DLSS quality. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card that is compatible, you can adjust the option here to render the game at a lower resolution instead of lowering it ourselves, and use AI to fill in the gaps. If you have an RTX 40 series card, I think you'll be able to turn on frame generation here, which should smooth out any stuttering. I'm not able to turn this on, however. The further to the performance side you go, the more visual artifacts you'll notice, but the better your performance in-game should be. For now, I'll leave it on quality, which is the highest quality setting and the least impact of DLSS. The exact same option goes for AMD FSR. If you don't have an NVIDIA graphics card, you can change the FSR2 option down here. And of course, should you have an NVIDIA graphics card, you'll probably also be able to use NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency. Usually you'll have this set to on if you're in a GPU-bound game, much like this one. Otherwise, if you have a really low-end CPU and your CPU bound for some reason, set this to on plus boost instead. Once we've made our changes, click Apply Changes, and everything should be set. Then on the Graphics tab, we'll have a whole bunch of options here. They give us a nice preview at the very top of what kind of resources we have, as well as how much we're actually using. This is very interesting to see, as for some reason, they didn't realize to lower the options when I was launching up the game for the first time. So anyways, this obviously is going to be very useful to figure out how much VRAM you have available and essentially performance and how much each of these options is going to cost. So it makes life a lot easier for us. First of all, at the very top, field of view is your preference. Set this to whatever you want and leave it there. It really doesn't matter for FPS purposes, as it's a huge gameplay thing that may work for you or may not. Set this to whatever you're comfortable with. Starting with this section here, texture quality is what's mainly going to take away your VRAM and cause you to run out of VRAM if you do, much like I did. For some reason, it's set to high for me at default, and changing this option, we will need to restart the game. At low, they have low, high, and ultra. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend ultra unless you're running a 4090. High is okay for a 3080 Ti apparently, but obviously if you're running out of VRAM still, set this lower. If I were to pull up a task manager, it's only half used up my VRAM, but for some reason it was claiming that it filled it up completely. This is probably just a glitch that'll get fixed sometime soon, but anyways, for now I'll leave this to high, but we can drop this to low. This will have the largest impact on VRAM. Visual effects quality, this should have a minimal impact in usual gameplay where not much is going on, walking around, etc. However, shadow quality will have a huge impact on performance, and of course raising this, you'll get much crispier, better looking shadows, but it will absolutely tank your FPS, especially in busy environments, which will be most of what this game is. I'd recommend keeping this at low. Post-processing quality has to do with adding extra colors and things like that, making everything look better. You can leave this on low, otherwise raising it will cost you a bit of FPS and mostly CPU as they mentioned here, but it's not necessarily going to have a huge impact. We'll verify all of these in just a moment when we actually get in game. Scrolling down, volumetric fog, you should have this set to low. It shouldn't make too much of an impact gameplay wise, but of course it could tank your FPS. Global illumination should have a huge impact on your gameplay, as I don't think things are ray traced here, but with Unreal Engine 5 there's a new lighting engine I'm pretty sure, and it'll have a large impact on your FPS should you choose to raise this. I'd say leave this at low. Reflection quality, these aren't things you're going to be staring at all the time, and it comes with a relatively large FPS impact, so I'd recommend lowering this here pretty much no matter what. Anisotropic filtering adds extra resolution to textures. You can raise this, but it is going to cost you quite a bit in both CPU and GPU apparently, but for most games, anisotropic filtering has a very minimal impact on performance. We'll verify this in just a moment. For now, I'll leave it to off. Ambient occlusion adds extra depth to the game and makes it look a bit better, but for the tiny impact it has on visuals, it's definitely not worth the loss in performance. So I'll leave it where it is at low. Atmosphere quality, I'm not entirely sure what it would be, but the impact on your graphics card is apparently high. Probably leave this on low as well. Cinematic depth of field, we don't have an off option unfortunately, so you're going to have it no matter what. The lower quality you have this set, the less effort's going to be going into preparing a nice blurry background in the distance. It shouldn't make too much of an impact during gameplay, but if you notice the blur in the background is too low quality for you, you can come back and raise this, but I'd say leave this on low. Foliage quality, they say, makes absolutely no difference no matter what you have this set to, but I'm pretty sure raising this in scenes with lots of foliage, it is going to tank your FPS, but we'll verify that in a bit. Light shafts, local exposure are both toggles. You can leave these on, and I'd probably recommend leaving them on. Light shafts are those god rays or shafts of light coming down from clouds and things like that. It makes the game look a whole lot prettier, and I'd recommend having them on for gameplay means, but of course, the impact on your FPS should be very minimal. Local exposure is essentially how your screen darkens and lightens when you're walking into and out of dark areas in-game, making the outside area much brighter or much darker depending on what's going on and the transition between scenes and rooms in-game. Mesh quality should mainly have to do with your VRAM in your PC, as this game recommends a 3080 Ti with 12 gigs of VRAM for medium quality. I'd recommend if you have anything lower than that, drop it to low. Cinematics motion blur has to do with cutscenes, and raising this will supposedly tank your FPS, but as you're not going to be playing anything, you could probably have a much better looking cinematic without needing to worry about input latency, for example. If you find that your FPS in cinematics is above 60, you can raise this and enjoy higher quality cinematics with higher quality motion blur, of course, as it doesn't really matter how much FPS you're getting in those certain scenes. For now, I'll just leave it on low. Particle quality, shadow mesh quality, shadow resolution quality, and subsurface scattering all have to do with VRAM, where the particle quality should have the least impact on how much VRAM it's using. The shadow mesh quality should have a much larger impact, which it does. Shadow resolution, a larger CPU impact. And finally, subsurface scattering, which is a very not noticeable effect, but it can add extra depth to the game. This is probably something you'll be leaving on low no matter what, as it does come with a huge performance cost. At the very bottom, we have mesh pool, as well as shadow rendering pool size and render target pool size. The higher you have this set, the more meshes it'll be able to load up into memory, as well as shadows and render targets, I would assume. Probably having these set to higher numbers, even though they say they have no impact, will raise the total number of things you can have cached in your graphics card and things like that, I would assume, meaning that moving between areas and loading new models and meshes should mean that there's less frame stuttering, etc. I'm not entirely too sure of these. Please do let me know in the comments down below if you know what these options are. For now, most of everything is set to low, even on high-end hardware. The only thing we've raised is texture quality. This should give us the best possible FPS, pretty much having everything off and low, except for these two and the texture quality, but the game should still look pretty good. We'll go ahead and investigate the actual cost of what we've been changing in-game using an FPS overlay such as this here. If you'd like to find out how to get one for yourself, check the description down below. For now, I'll fire into the game. So during the cutscene, we're getting 80 to 100 FPS. I'd probably end up turning up the motion blur quality, the cinematic motion blur quality, and we should probably do it while we can. I'll set it all the way from low to the highest option we have, which is, in this case, Ultra. We'll apply changes and close it just to see what kind of FPS impact we get. Obviously, you can see a small difference in FPS, but we've only really seen a small drop, maybe from 110 in certain scenes to 90, but motion blur is definitely noticeably much smoother and better looking. We also have cinematics depth of field, which is currently set to low, which you can see there. We'll go ahead and raise that to maybe Ultra to see what kind of difference it makes. I'm expecting a very small impact. And for the most part, yes, people in the background are blurry, but if we lower it again, people in the background are much less noticeably blurry. So lowering that option does lower the amount of cinematic motion blur in scenes. Everything's very crisp, as we saw just a second ago, but if we raise the quality, all of a sudden, things in the background are a lot more blurry. If you'd like more depth of field, that is an option you can raise with a somewhat minimal FPS impact. We're getting 60 here. Let's go ahead and drop it down to low from Ultra, and we're getting maybe 66, 68. A small impact on FPS, especially during cutscenes where we have no control over what's going on and no need to control what's going on, but having the option set to anything higher than low seems to add more depth of field blur. And there we go, we're actually in game now. Now keep in mind, I'm on a 3080 Ti and cutting edge CPU i9, and we're getting 56 FPS. For the most part, everything is set to low, So this is going to be a bit of a rough and very estimate FPS optimization guide. There's at least tons of stuff going on here, so it should be a pretty good estimator of what each option does, as well as the cost of each option. This seems like a good spot to sit. We're currently sitting at 57 FPS with everything set down to low, other than texture quality, which we've got on high. We'll change it down to low and apply changes, but unfortunately we'll need to restart the game for this. But loading back into this very busy scene, let's see if we can position ourselves in the same place. 60 FPS, 65, 72, 70. Well, it seems like we've gone up by maybe 20 FPS. I'm pretty sure it was in the upper 50s, but the FPS has definitely improved drastically, all the way up to 66-ish. This is at the lowest possible setting, and as for how the game looks, it still looks pretty good. Let's try raising this option, which may prevent me from launching the game, but let's see exactly what happens if we set it up to Ultra. For this, we will need to restart the game once more, and back to being in-game, positioning ourselves in the same place, 59, 60 FPS. It's dropped by maybe 10 from being on low, but as for Ultra, there's not too much a difference, except maybe some of the objects are a bit prettier. A 10 to 15 FPS difference is something you can expect, which should be somewhat minimal, as it's mainly how much VRAM you have available and how much is being used. For me personally, I think I'll just drop it down to low to enjoy the extra 10 FPS, but it does look pretty good with everything set up to Ultra in terms of textures. Let's open up the options and see where we go from 60 to average FPS. So to spare you my pain and suffering, I spent the next hour benchmarking each and every individual setting, restarting in between most of the changes wherever necessary, and to be honest, none of the settings really did anything at all, at least when everything was set down to low. Raising all of the options or none of the options all at once will probably have an impact, but when you mess around with each option individually or sometimes even in groups, there's very little impact. On the screen now, I'll show you the options that had very minimal impact but probably have some kind of an impact in different situational settings. Then these ones had a small impact, which is maybe 5 or so-ish FPS. These ones had absolutely no impact, or at least in this scene. And on top of this, the cinematic specific options pretty much had no performance impact other than changing the way that they looked in terms of depth of field and motion blur. Finally, the only options that actually made some kind of an FPS difference were foliage quality. Surprisingly, in this scene where there's literally no foliage, this had a pretty big impact of 10 or so-ish FPS, and shadow mesh quality. Understandable, shadows are usually relatively expensive, so yeah, these are the only two options that really had some kind of FPS difference. However, on top of this, changing global illumination quality, restarting the game as they asked me to, caused the game to crash when next I launched it up, which is very weird. Then anisotropic filtering, they said raising this absolutely tanks your FPS according to their inbuilt system here that tells you exactly what happens and what does what, but in my case, raising it from 0 to 16x, which is supposed to apparently absolutely tank my hardware, it actually gave me an extra 10 to 15 FPS, which I'm sure is not supposed to happen, but it happened anyways. Beyond this, I'll show you my thoughts about the game, as well as DLSS, FSR, etc. As for the most part, this FPS optimization hasn't come out to much, other than put everything on low, otherwise things will probably crash and not launch at all, and as for the actual impact of each of these options, there's very little impact, if any at all. A few of them do have a medium or somewhat noticeable impact, but it's definitely an odd choice. I would assume raising a lot of these, you'll see all of the small differences in FPS compounded into a much lower FPS game. So yeah, on a 3080 Ti on really high-end hardware with tons of VRAM available on the latest Windows 11, this game doesn't work well unless everything's set down to low, and when you're playing with such, it seems to work pretty well. To be honest, FPS isn't crazy bad, but at least we're in the upper 50s. But again, on such expensive hardware as a baseline to play this game, it's definitely gonna be a weird one. So would I recommend you get it now? Well, that's your choice. If you have the hardware available, then sure, go for it. Otherwise, if you have a lower end hardware than a 3080, yeah, well, this game may not be for you in its current state. I would assume as time goes on, EA will optimize the game and make it easier to run on other hardware, including current gen hardware. So really, it's up to you and whether you're willing to dive into it. We've run through all of the graphics options here, and for the most part, none of them really make a difference, even though they say that they will. My system is completely overkill, and that's sadly what you need in order to play this game. It's just my graphics card that's lagging behind, I suppose. It could be a 4090, but I don't have that kind of money lying around. For the most part, at 2K, 60 FPS with everything on low is a playable experience. Oh, and don't forget DLSS on quality. Let's just try turning this off to see what kind of FPS we get at native resolution. Native resolution 49. That's not very good. On quality, which is what we were on before, it should be at around 59. Yep, there we go, 60. At balance, which is probably what most people are going to play at, we're still sitting around 60 apparently. And finally, performance, 80. Okay, that's actually really good, but this person's face is noticeably blurrier, and from a distance, I would say even more so. So 80 FPS with things on performance, this is actually really playable. It really doesn't look that bad, to be honest, and you could probably lower a few other options and expect to keep the same rough visual quality. For me though, I'll probably be playing this on performance if I'd want a smoother experience, but let's try out FSR. From absolutely native resolution at 50-ish FPS in this direction, we'll try FSR, we'll try quality for example, 66, and it actually looks really crisp compared to DLSS where everything is blurry. What about balanced? The same goes here, we're now getting 70 FPS and things still look really crisp. Trying performance, where things are really pushed to their limit, 80 FPS, and once again things look crisp, though there's some noticeable artifacting around moving objects. So with this very quick test, I'd probably not be using DLSS at all, and instead I'd be using AMD FSR even on high-end NVIDIA graphics cards just as things look clearer. Again, this is quality FSR2, this is native where things are a bit blurrier, and DLSS quality where things are still blurry. Things just look better in FSR for some reason. Also, turning one off sometimes doesn't unlock the other one. You may need to go out and back into this menu. So if anything, I'll be playing this game with quality FSR. This seems pretty good. Maybe not quality, but balanced. Now we're sitting at a solid 80 FPS, whereas before it was 60 and 40 at native, where things still look pretty good. There's a bit of shimmering going on in the distance where there's tons of things all put together and moving around objects. It's definitely noticeable, especially in the background, but I'd take this over pretty much unplayable performance, even on super high-end hardware. Now, for the most part, I'll be quitting out of this game, and we'll run through just one final option. Though, also look at that, the in-game person over here has changed quite a bit. The hair is noticeably more pixely and weird looking, the same with this texture in the background. The water, AMD FSR makes it look a bit weirder, not as blurry and smooth as DLSS, but for me, I do like a sharper game. Okay, well, it's your preference. FSR seems to look a bit cleaner, but for some reason has a lot of visual artifacts. Alright, looking back at the configuration files, which was once again start R percentage local app data percentage, then P3 saved config followed by Windows or whatever you see here. Inside of this, we'll have a bunch of different files, and in the engine.ini file, we'll be adding all of this, which you can see from this point onwards, which you'll find linked in the description down below. These commands are pretty much global for all different Unreal Engine games to help lower stuttering and other issues like that. These are all recommended options that you should probably go ahead and chuck in here if you're experiencing stuttering, and it's worthwhile testing your FPS before and after putting these in here, even though it should result in a minimal impact there. You'll find this post from r/optimized gaming in the description down below, where you can copy from this link here, this bit of text right here, which you can click copy with here in order to grab and paste into that engine.ini file at the very end, just making sure to leave an extra line somewhere here. But for now, that's really it for this quick guide. This game does have a long way to go in optimization, but it's essentially putting itself out there as the best looking game or something along those lines, but you need absolutely insane hardware in order to run it, but that's really not what a lot of people have. For the most part, you'll be dropping everything down to low and using FSR if you like a crispier game, or DLSS if you like a smoother game, and that's pretty much that. More than likely, if you're not running a 4090 or something crazy like that, you're not going to experience the game for what it's advertised to be, so it is what it is. Anyways, leave your comments down below. I'd like to see what you think about this game, especially if you've played it for yourself. Thank you all for watching. My name's been Troubleshoot, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao.